Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we step onto the damp, creaking deck of a pirate brigantine somewhere off the coast of Barbados, where the air is thick with salt and someone's bad decision. The lanterns swing with the tide, casting jittery shadows over a semicircle of men in shirts ragged from salt and time. Two pirates stand across from each other, boots wide, hands twitching near pistols. Except tonight, they won't be using them. No, tonight they settle things with something far stranger. A pair of carved musket balls, used not to fire, but to roll. This isn't your ordinary tavern brawl. It's a trial of luck, honor, and occasionally missing fingers. One wrong move, one unlucky bounce, and you could be patching sails with your teeth for the rest of the voyage. You probably won't survive this career path, but hey, it has better dental than the Royal Navy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You smell tar. Not just any tar. Rum-laced, tropical, cannon-warmed tar that clings to ropes and dreams. You're crouched behind a barrel of biscuit flour, trying not to sneeze as two men argue just a few feet from your nose. Fair and square, one growls, a wiry Scotsman with a face like dried mango. 2 rolls. Mine was higher. The other, taller, darker, with an earring made from a coin older than your grandmother, slaps his palm on the crate. Yours bounced. No bounce, we said. Rules is rules. They turn as one. The first mate, missing an eye and an entire understanding of indoor voice volume, raises a hand. Enough! Captain says musket dice. Bring 'em. A hush falls. You don't breathe. Even the rats seem to stop chewing rope. Someone rustles inside a leather pouch and plucks out 2 small spheres, no bigger than cherries. Except, look closer. These musket balls have been carved. One is etched with tally lines, another with crude dots and runes that might have been letters before too much grog got involved. They're slightly misshapen, that's the point. They don't spin like proper dice. They roll like trouble. The 2 pirates kneel, each holding a musket ball between finger and thumb. They face each other like weirdly informal gladiators. Someone scratches the deck into a square. Another lights a second lantern and holds it low. First to win 2 throws, the mate says, biting into something that might have once been an apple. The first roll is a dud. The die clatters against a bucket and lands dot down. The second lands hard and rolls in a slow, suspenseful arc. 6 dots. That's high. Cheers. 1 point to Dreed Mango Face. Second roll. The darker pirate lets his fall from higher. It rolls out of the square. Immediate boos. You cheat like a Frenchman, someone calls. Laughter. Except it's nervous. 1 more roll. This time they both kneel lower, almost reverently, like gamblers at a church altar. Thunk. Thunk. Both balls settle. 3 dots. 4 dots. He's lost. There's silence, then movement. The winner steps back, the loser stands, head high, removes his own belt sash and hands it over. Yours now, he mutters. Not just a strip of cloth. This was a trophy, a status marker. The sash meant you were quartermaster of the brig. And just like that, the job has changed hands. No blood. No broken fingers. Just 2 bumpy spheres and some oddball dignity. Musket dice were how pirates settled their most personal grievances without damaging the labor pool. Because, unlike in Royal Navy ranks, where flogging was a spectator sport and mutiny got you hanged, pirate democracy had one strange goal: keeping the ship functional. Kill your cook, and who's baking your salt bread tomorrow? Break your helmsman's nose, and say goodbye to coordinated tacking. So they invented this compromise. Part game, part fate, part public spectacle. Roll dice carved from musket lead or whalebone, with odds everyone could see, and you avoid the mess of bleeding on the map table. There were rules, naturally. The die must land inside the chalked square. No rolling from a height over a man's knee, no wet dice. And never, ever, roll while drunk. This last rule was universally ignored, but it existed, like the pirate code itself, part guideline, part morality tale. Some say it started in Tortuga. Others whisper it was a Caribbean twist on old Nordic rune casting, brought by wandering Dutchmen. Historians still argue whether musket dice were real tradition or just salty legend, an embellishment repeated too often by romantic biographers looking for punchlines. But you've seen it now. Felt the way the ship leans when men gather in silence to let chance choose justice. You know it in your bones, and in this floating micro-society, where every hammock hangs by a thread of tolerance, a bad roll is sometimes the best outcome. Because the only thing worse than losing is winning. Section 2. You're still crouched behind that barrel of biscuit flour, which is now starting to feel like the least comfortable hiding spot since someone tried to nap on a cannonball pile. The dice have been pocketed, the crew has dispersed, and the new quartermaster is already shouting about inventory like he hasn't just won his post over a slightly dented ball. But tonight wasn't unusual. In fact, it's etched into the code. The pirate code, yes, the very thing Jack Sparrow waved around like a soggy napkin, wasn't just fictional nonsense. Known as Articles of Agreement, these codes were real, handwritten contracts drawn up before setting sail. Every man had to sign or make his mark. Refuse, and you didn't sail, or eat, or possibly breathe much longer. Each captain had his own version, tailored like a poorly hemmed waistcoat to fit the personality of the crew. Some were strict, no drinking before noon, which was ignored, no brawling aboard except on Tuesdays, equal shares for all, unless your parrot had seniority, but almost all had one clause in common, a structured way to resolve disputes. Because when you live elbow to elbow with a man who smells like salted goat and snores like a harpooned walrus, fights are inevitable. And yet, pirates were shockingly democratic. Unlike naval ships ruled by a captain with near absolute power, pirate crews voted on almost everything: who gets captaincy, where to dock, whether to attack a ship or let it pass, and yes, how to solve the inevitable bickering that comes from 30 men sharing 2 toothbrushes and 1 chamber pot. So, codified within these articles was the right of arbitration. Sometimes that meant putting the dispute to a vote. Sometimes it meant appointing a crew jury, like a floating courtroom with rum for gavel polish. But sometimes, when tempers ran too hot, or when the matter was deeply personal, it came down to chance. And that's where musket dice come in. You can imagine the logic. Rather than risk half the crew in a knife fight over stolen tobacco, better to let 2 grown men roll a piece of carved lead and accept whatever fate it delivers. It's strangely modern, really. The psychological advantage of blaming the dice, not the opponent, made it easier to walk away without resentment. But the pirate code did more than preserve harmony. It was a radical idea for the 18th century, a system built on consent. You didn't just obey the captain, you chose him, and you could vote him out. In 1716, the Articles of the famed pirate Captain Bartholomew Roberts, Black Bart, but who captured over 400 ships, explicitly included clauses about voting, equal shares, and the prohibition of fighting on board. Article 10 even forbade bringing women aboard to prevent quarrels, a rule that was occasionally interpreted as, let's all just calm down and roll dice instead. Historians still argue whether every crew used musket dice, or if it was a local fad among English-speaking pirates. There's only scattered mention of the practice in primary sources, like obscure journals and court transcripts from trials at Port Royal. Some think it might have been exaggerated later by 19th century writers, who had a flair for embellishing everything, with parrots and peg legs. But oral histories passed down among Caribbean descendants sometimes include stories of dice games that decided more than just chores. The Bahamian folktale speaks of two pirate brothers who rolled dice for the right to marry the same woman, and the loser honored the outcome, sailing off with nothing but a bottle and a new tattoo. Back on your ship, the articles are stored in a waterproof chest beneath the captain's bunk. He never opens them now, too busy with the ledger, counting casks of pickled lemons. But the crew remembers. The dice aren't written in the articles. Not exactly. But they're understood. One of the younger sailors, the one missing an eyebrow from a musket misfire, calls them God's marbles. He says it like a joke, but there's reverence in his voice. Because in this world, where every rule bends like canvas in a storm, the dice feel absolute. Pure. Unbribable. You roll, you lose, you bow your head. You win, and you don't gloat, because fate might be watching, and she's petty. It's strange how this code, full of holes and stains, has kept order in a place where nothing else sticks. Empires come and go. Navies rise and rot. But here, on a ship cobbled together with stolen nails and moldy dreams, the law is agreed upon, enforced by consensus, and settled by dice. And honestly, it works better than most governments you've seen. Section 3. It happens just after sunrise, before the decks are scrubbed, before anyone's poured their first mug of morning rum. The sky is bruised pink, the sea sighs in lazy sloshes, and already the shouting starts. This time it's over a knife. A fine one with a carved ivory hilt, and a blade that may or may not have belonged to a Portuguese officer. It's missing from the quartermaster's chest, and two men, Tomas and Grig, have taken to shoving each other like angry children. You're peeling a mango with your thumbnail nearby, trying to stay invisible. Nothing ruins breakfast like a duel. But duels aren't what they used to be. No pistols, no 10 paces, no mistimed gunpowder ending in poetic tragedy. Instead, the dice. The first mate's voice carries from the upper deck. Musket dice. Settle it now, or both of you go in the longboat until you can share a blanket without biting. Everyone groans. Not because of the dice, but because last time, someone did get put in the longboat for 6 hours and came back singing ballads about dolphins that no one has recovered from. Tomas, younger, twitchy, says, "He'll cheat. I've seen him palm the die." Grig shrugs. Rolls are rolls. They're ushered to the center deck, where someone's already chalked a square and set down the usual throwing plank. Flat driftwood just stable enough. One by one, the crew drifts over, forming a lazy circle. Some shirtless, others holding half-peeled potatoes or mugs of teeth-backening coffee. The dice are fetched. These are lead musket balls shaved into rough cubes, though no two look exactly alike. One has a dent from where it once got caught in a cannon rig. Another is stained. Nobody wants to know why. The rules are stated again for formality. 3 rounds. No bouncing off crates, no spitting before a throw. Bad luck. You feel the tension rise not because of the stakes, but because of what the loser might have to do. That's the thing about musket dice. You don't just lose. You owe. The punishment is chosen beforehand, either by agreement or by crew consensus. This morning's terms: if Grig loses, he gives up the knife and sings 2 stanzas of The Widow of Wilmington in falsetto. Well, if Tomas loses, he gets latrine duty and has to stop calling himself El Tigre. You'd think this would be serious, but oddly, it's not. There's a ritual humor to it all. The way the crew leans in, holding back laughter. The way one old salt hums a fanfare. It's public catharsis. The same way Romans once used theater to diffuse political tension, except here it's just pirates and poorly carved cubes. They roll. First round, Tomas rolls a 5, Grig rolls a 6. Cheers erupt. Someone tries to harmonize. Second round, both roll 3s. A tie. Groans. Third round, Tomas rolls a 2, Grig rolls a 4. It's over. El Tigre, no more. Someone's already chanting El Gato in the background. Tomas groans, but bows low. He walks off to fetch the bucket and mop, while Grig retrieves the knife. Not to keep, but to return to the quartermaster's lockbox. Even he knows winning doesn't mean looting your own. But here's the deeper truth. Nobody wants to win these things too hard. Because while it settles disputes, it also exposes you. Too many wins, and people start whispering about loaded dice, about bargains with the sea, about favoritism. Pirate society, for all its brutality, was built on something surprisingly delicate: balance. Too much force, and it cracks. Too much softness, and it sinks. That's why even the winners lose a little. Why the real reward is walking away without a cut throat, a bruised ego, or a parrot pecking your nose at midnight. Historians still debate whether pirates truly preferred musket dice over duels, or if this was just a way to avoid Royal Navy court records. There's little surviving documentation. The Royal Navy wasn't in the habit of preserving pirate arbitration logs. But scattered notes exist. A trial transcript from 1722 mentions a pirate ship where disputes of honor were oft resolved by cubes of lead cast thrice upon a plank. Another sailor's journal from 1718 recalls watching two men roll ball dice over a broken compass, with the loser made to wear the broken lens as a necklace. Was it real? Was it common? Was it just one of those stories that grew legs and swaggered ashore? You don't know for sure. But you do know the sound of dice rolling across worn wood, the collective breath held tight, the flash of numbers under lantern light. You've seen men settle their pride with a shrug, a smirk, and a splash of rum. And honestly, it's more civilized than most board meetings you've attended. So, the problem of not knowing what to do. We sit there and try to pinpoint the precise moment when we all know. Section 4. You're down in the hold now, tucked between barrels of salted beef and damp sacks of flour that always smell just slightly of mildew and feet. It's cooler here, and quieter, which makes it easier to listen in as the bosun explains the logic of musket dice to a new recruit who looks like he's still recovering from land legs. They ain't games, the bosun mutters, pulling the cork from a rum jug with his teeth. They're insurance. And if you're smart, lad, you'll pray you never roll 'em. The boy nods like he understands. He absolutely does not. You do, though. You've seen enough to get the shape of it. On a pirate ship, every man's a shareholder. That's not metaphor. That's economy. Crews were often paid by share, not wage. The captain might get 2 shares, the quartermaster 1.5, regular crew a single share each. Even the cook, even the cabin boy. You fight together, you plunder together, you divide together. And nothing threatens that division more than conflict. So instead of letting anger fester into bloodshed, they rolled dice. You shift your weight, careful not to knock over the hanging lantern. This isn't about honor, it's about efficiency. No time for grudges when there are Spanish galleons to catch. But here's where it gets strange. The dice weren't always just musket balls. Sometimes they were carved from ivory, bone, even coral. Once, on a Dutch ship turned pirate, someone had used pewter figurines from a stolen chess set, numbered crudely with a knife. Other times the dice weren't cubes at all. Spherical musket balls, etched like ancient gaming stones, tumbled in erratic arcs across the deck. You couldn't predict them, which made it fair, or so the thinking went. The randomness was the point. A sword favors the strong. A vote favors the popular. But dice? Dice favor no one. They're the sea's coin toss. And the logic behind it? Surprisingly robust. If you run a floating business filled with armed, drunk men who haven't seen land in weeks, your #1 priority is preventing death by jealousy. And the moment someone thinks the quartermaster is stealing grog or the captain's picking favorites, morale slips faster than a greased weasel. So you create a system, a visible, physical, almost sacred way of choosing outcomes that no one can argue with. Because it's not you deciding, it's chance. That's why musket dice mattered. You hear the bosun's voice drift again. Captain once rolled dice to pick which man got the hammock closest to the air vent. Saved us 3 days of bickering. The new lad pipes up, but what if someone cheats? The bosun chuckles, slow and dark. Then we roll again, this time with consequences. And indeed, that was part of the system too. If you were caught cheating, palming a die, faking a roll, nudging the deck, your punishment wasn't just loss of reputation. It could be lashings, or worse, you'd be forced to roll again, but with all the odds stacked against you. And a massive weight slowly pulled down on you till in one legendary case, told half in song, half in sneers, a pirate named Jimble tried to fix the roll by weighting the dice with melted coin. When caught, he was made to roll once more. If he landed a 6, he kept his teeth. Anything else? Well, let's just say soup became easier to eat afterward. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect actual structure or simply illustrate the improvisational justice of life at sea. Some scholars believe the dice were symbolic more than statistical, used for show, with the real outcomes already understood. Others suggest they were used much like drawing straws, a way to limit resentment in high-stakes decisions. But here's the real kicker. Sometimes men volunteered for the dice, not because they wanted to roll, but because it was better than the alternatives. You could resolve an insult without spilling blood, or settle a punishment without flogging, or choose a man for a dangerous mission with no hard feelings. And in the logic of pirate society, that made perfect sense. You think of it like this. You're in the middle of nowhere, floating on a splintered miracle of wood and rope, surrounded by men who can and will kill if provoked. You need a system that costs nothing, carries no blood debt, and has the illusion of fairness. Enter the dice. So the next time you hear someone talk about pirates like they were just savages in scarves, remember this. They invented a form of conflict resolution more psychologically advanced than some modern office teams. No HR, no therapy, just 2 dice and a lot of peer pressure. And it worked, most of the time. Because, as the bosun mutters just before he curls up on a grain sack, better a bad roll than a good funeral. Section 5. You're on shore now, briefly docked in a quiet cove somewhere in the Leeward Islands, the kind of place where the palms whisper like old men gossiping and the humidity wraps around your lungs like a damp rag. The crew has scattered, some to barter, some to drink, one to find a chicken that looked at him funny, but you stay behind, tucked beneath an overturned skiff, listening as the captain leans against a barrel and tells a story so old it has barnacles. Musket dice, he says, picking at a scab that might have once been a tattoo, weren't always ours. A pause. They came from somewhere else. He taps the side of his skull, then the side of his musket. Like most clever things. And now you're curious. Where did musket dice come from? The answer, like all good pirate tales, is slippery. They come from somewhere else. Somewhere else called Sliden. Some say it began in the Spanish Main, among deserters from the treasure fleets who brought with them more than gold. Superstitions, rituals, gambling habits, picked up from Moorish mercenaries or even Aztec captives. Others claim it was born in Madagascar, where European pirates mingled with Malagasy traders and learned to cast bones not just for divination, but for decisions. One theory, rather academically appealing, traces the practice back to ancient sailor traditions in the Mediterranean. Phoenician traders once used pebbles etched with glyphs to settle disputes among crews. The logic was ancient. Fate, not fists. Historians still argue whether any of this is more than conjecture. The evidence is patchy at best. A line in a Dutch privateer's log, a strange set of brass cubes found in a wreck off Martinique, an offhand reference in a French admiral's report describing dice rituals among the English sea bandits. But by the early 1700s, one thing is certain. The practice had spread. Pirates across the Caribbean, the Gulf of Guinea, even along the Indian coast, all seemed to share some version of the tradition. The implements varied: bone, coral, hardwood. The rules shifted. Some crews rolled to assign blame, others to absolve it. But the spirit was the same: let chance decide. And here's where it gets wild. Some of the dice were enchanted, not in the literal wand-waving sense, but in the deeply human, talismanic way. Pirates carved runes into the corners. Some painted one side red with turtle blood. One particularly cursed set, said to be made from a Spanish bishop's thumb bone, was buried in 3 different sandbars after a mutiny that ended with 9 men vanishing without a splash. Superstition draped over these objects like mold on hardtack. You didn't borrow someone else's dice. You didn't roll them in daylight. You never, ever laughed when they landed. One wrong giggle, and you might be dicing for your teeth tomorrow. In the darker corners of Tortuga's taverns, old-timers claimed some dice had memories, that they'd start rolling high for cowards, low for the brave, that one pair rolled nothing but 3s after their owner was thrown overboard in a sack of eels. You suspect much of that is rum-fueled nonsense. And yet, you've seen the way seasoned pirates eye the dice before a roll, murmuring nonsense or kissing their thumb. You've seen a man drop a die that lands wrong, then pocket it and fetch another one, because the first wasn't feeling right. Logic? None. Ritual? Absolutely. And it's not just for fights. One evening, when a ship was becalmed for 5 days and boredom had reached the level of spontaneous beard sculpting, the captain called for the dice, not to settle a grievance, but to break the monotony. The prize? The last bit of lemon peel. You rolled. You lost. You still remember the smirk on the man who won, missing 4 teeth, but grinning like he'd captured a frigate. And that's the strange power of these little objects. Whether it's a blood feud or a piece of citrus, the dice level the field. For a moment, nobody's rank matters. It's just gravity, angle, and fate. And in a world of rot and rust and raw-knuckled power, that kind of impartiality feels like a miracle, even if you still think they're cursed. Musket dice, he says, picking at a scab that might have once been a tattoo, weren't always ours. A pause. They came from somewhere else. He taps the side of his skull, then the side of his musket. Like most clever things. And now you're curious. Where did musket dice come from? The answer, like all good pirate tales, is slippery. Some say it began in the Spanish Main, among deserters from the treasure fleets who brought with them more than gold. Superstitions, rituals, gambling habits picked up from Moorish mercenaries or even Aztec captives. Others claim it was born in Madagascar, where European pirates mingled with Malagasy traders and learned to cast bones not just for divination, but for decisions. One theory, rather academically appealing, traces the practice back to ancient sailor traditions in the Mediterranean. Phoenician traders once used pebbles etched with glyphs to settle disputes among crews. The logic was ancient. Fate, not fists. Historians still argue whether any of this is more than conjecture. The evidence is patchy at best. A line in a Dutch privateer's log, a strange set of brass cubes found in a wreck off Martinique, an offhand reference in a French admiral's report describing dice rituals among the English sea bandits. But by the early 1700s, one thing is certain. The practice had spread. Pirates across the Caribbean, the Gulf of Guinea, even along the Indian coast, all seemed to share some version of the tradition. The implements varied: lead, bone, coral, hardwood. The rules shifted. Some crews rolled to assign blame, others to absolve it. But the spirit was the same. Let chance decide. And here's where it gets wild. Some of the dice were enchanted, not in the literal, wand-waving sense, but in the deeply human, talismanic way. Pirates carved runes into the corners. Some painted one side red with turtle blood. One particularly cursed set, said to be made from a Spanish bishop's thumb bone, was buried in 3 different sandbars after a mutiny that ended with 9 men vanishing without a splash. Superstition draped over these objects like mold on hardtack. You didn't borrow someone else's dice. You didn't roll them in daylight. You never, ever laughed when they landed. One wrong giggle, and you might be dicing for your teeth tomorrow. In the darker corners of Tortuga's taverns, old-timers claimed some dice had memories, that they'd start rolling high for cowards, low for the brave, that one pair rolled nothing but 3s after their owner was thrown overboard in a sack of eels. You suspect much of that is rum-fueled nonsense. And yet, you've seen the way seasoned pirates eye the dice before a roll, murmuring nonsense or kissing their thumb. You've seen a man drop a die that lands wrong, then pocket it and fetch another one, because the first wasn't feeling right. Logic? None. Ritual? Absolutely. And it's not just for fights. One evening, when a ship was becalmed for 5 days and boredom had reached the level of spontaneous beard sculpting, the captain called for the dice, not to settle a grievance, but to break the monotony. The prize? The last bit of lemon peel. You rolled, you lost, you still remember the smirk on the man who won, missing 4 teeth but grinning like he'd captured a frigate. And that's the strange power of these little objects. Whether it's a blood feud or a piece of citrus, the dice level the field. For a moment, nobody's rank matters. It's just gravity, angle, and fate. And in a world of rot and rust and raw-knuckled power, that kind of impartiality feels like a miracle. Even if you still think they're cursed. As she sat, watching the world go by, something, Section 7, you wake to rain. Not a storm, just that steady, hypnotic tap of tropical drizzle on the sails above. The kind of rain that turns wooden decks slick and makes even the parrot shut up for once. You're curled near a barrel of onions, half dreaming of lemon cake, when a commotion stirs overhead. More dice, of course, but this time, it's different. Just that time, it's different. Something. Dab, 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 babbage, dab, dab. The text is different. Something. The subject, not a fight, not a theft, a vote. Someone's challenging the captain's decision to delay docking. A storm was spotted on the horizon yesterday, and he's chosen to wait it out at sea. But half the crew disagrees. Cargo is dry, wind is low, and more importantly, the rum is gone. In pirate society, you don't just grumble behind the captain's back. You call a vote. And sometimes, you roll for it. See, pirate ships weren't monarchies. They were floating democracies with seaweed in their teeth. Most crews operated under the principle of collective agreement. Big decisions? You bring them to the men. Life or math calls? They're debated, loudly and with spitting. Today's procedure is unique. Each man rolls a musket die. Evens mean stay put, odds mean make for port. One man, one roll. The quartermaster keeps tally on a cracked piece of slate. The dice are passed from hand to hand. Some roll quickly. Others clutch them, whispering to the sky or thumping them against their chests. One old-timer licks his die, then throws it underhand like he's bowling in a tavern league. You watch the pile of tiny dice grow, a mess of numbers and notches and illegible carvings. When the count is done, 23 odds, 22 evens, port it is. The captain doesn't even argue. He nods once and gives the order to adjust course. His face is unreadable, but there's no anger, just acceptance. Because that's the code. That's the power of the dice. It's not about chance now. It's about participation. Every man has handled the decision. No one can say it was made in secret or in shadow. The dice weren't just rolled, they were witnessed. And there's a magic in that. You begin to understand something crucial. Musket dice weren't always about punishment or jokes. Sometimes, they were the closest thing to law a pirate ship had. Not just what they settled, but how. Publicly, equally, with a shrug, a smirk, and a weight off everyone's shoulders. Historians still debate whether pirate voting with dice was widespread or anecdotal. Some cite journals from captured ships, others dismiss it as romantic embellishment. But the practice has logic, and logic leaves fingerprints. The dice democratized decisions. They slowed tempers. They gave men a feeling of control, even when they lost. And perhaps that's why they endured. In a world of arbitrary justice, where a captain on a Navy frigate could flog you for looking at him sideways, pirates found a way to share the burden of command. You roll the dice, you live with the roll. No man could claim unfairness. No man could hide behind authority. And when it was over, there was closure. Even the losers might help hoist the sails without dragging resentment behind them like barnacles. Of course, there were exceptions. Once, on a sloop off Martinique, a bosun rolled low in a vote about which port to raid next. He didn't take it well. In fact, he threw the dice into the sea and declared the result cursed. The captain made him dive for them. He never found the dice, but he did come up with a sea urchin in his boot and a better attitude. Since then, the replacement dice, carved from driftwood and sealed with wax, have been called the bosun twins. They roll high more often than not, which is suspicious, but no one complains, probably because no one wants to dive again. That's the other truth about pirate dice. They developed personalities. Some were believed lucky, some were banned. One pair was kept in a lead box and only used during grave decisions. No one could quite define what grave meant, but if someone used that box, you knew things were serious. You begin to appreciate just how complex this whole system is. It's not just about gambling, it's about ritual, about creating moments where men agree to be ruled by something other than ego. And in that way, musket dice weren't a novelty. They were governance. You look up at the shifting sails, the adjusted course, the quietly grumbling crew, who all know the vote was close, but fair. And as you watch the ship move, slowly and surely, toward a port with questionable plumbing and very certain mosquitoes, you feel something rare for a pirate deck. Harmony. Aught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body. Section 8. Rain turns to mist as the coastline fades behind you, and the ship begins to dance with the breeze again. You're perched near the helm, cloaked in a wet blanket that smells like whatever fish Gibbet wore on his head last week. Below, the ship creaks with renewed energy. Brokes groan, sails snap, someone curses cheerfully at a bucket of crabs. Then it happens. A shout, a clatter, a lurch. One of the younger lads, too eager, too tall for his own safety, has tipped over a barrel of limes mid-turn. The quartermaster's foot goes out from under him, and down he goes, right into the arms of a crate of glass. When the dust settles, he's limping, badly. Now there's a real problem. Who steers the ship? Quartermasters weren't just glorified bookkeepers. They often acted as second-in-command, mediators, and sometimes helmsmen in tricky waters, and sometimes warmen in tricky waters. With him out of commission, the ship's hierarchy shifts. You'd expect shouting or a drawn cutlass, or at least an arm wrestling tournament. But instead, the captain, who's more interested in his pipe than in drama, calls for the musket dice. 3 candidates, he says without looking up. Best 2 rolls. You watch as 3 volunteers step forward. None are ideal. One has a squint. One can't count past 6 without toes. And one, the favorite, has the unfortunate habit of singing to the wheel. Still, the dice don't care. The ship tilts slightly, but the deck square is chalked, and the dice roll true. Each man takes a turn. First roll, a 6, a A 4, a 5. Gasps. Someone whistles. Second roll. A 3, a 2, a 1. The 6-4 combo takes it. The singer sits back down, humming something minor key and tragic. And just like that, the decision is made. No shouting, no sore winners. Just a quiet nod and a new hand on the tiller. It's absurd, but it works. Because the musket dice have become more than just a game or a fallback. They're woven into the way this ship runs. Sometimes, literally. You once saw the ship's sailmaker roll dice to decide which patch design to sew next. It was a choice between a skull, a phoenix, and an alarming number of hearts. He rolled hearts. He regretted it. But the dice weren't always so well behaved. One night, during a storm off Dominica, the crew tried to settle a rationing argument mid-squall. Rain pelted the deck sideways. The dice box slipped from someone's grip and spilled across the planks, disappearing into puddles and lightning. Someone suggested calling off the roll. Another said, that was bad luck. A third yelled, let the sea decide. So they did. They threw the dice into the sea. The result? Calm, strange silence. And then the lightning struck the foremast. Nobody tried that again. Afterward, they carved a new set from teak, wider, heavier, harder to lose in a gust. These became the storm dice, used only during rough weather. They roll poorly but dramatically, with a sound like doom clinking on a tankard. Historians still argue whether dice rolling in high-risk situations actually influenced pirate decisions, or whether it was just pageantry, a theater of chance to mask gut instincts. Some even suggest it was a form of prototherapy, a way to distribute tension during long hauls with no visible enemy but time. But you've been here. You've felt the air shift after a roll. You've watched disputes die mid-rant because of a lucky number. You've seen grown men stare at pitted brass cubes like they held the judgment of gods. So yes, maybe it's pageantry, but it's effective pageantry. And honestly, what is governance if not a shared story everyone agrees to believe? A roll of dice settles the matter. The winner gets the wheel. The ship turns toward open sea, and nobody complains. Even the singer hums a hopeful tune now, because like the rain, like the tide, like the slow grind of barnacles on hull planks, some things are better left to chance. Section 9. You're below deck again, this time crouched beside the carpenter's bench, where the wood shavings curl like autumn leaves, and the smell of tar, seawater, and pine resin hangs heavy in the air. Across from you, lit only by a lantern swinging with the swell, sits the ship's oddest pair of treasures. The dice. Not just any pair. The dice. The originals, if the stories are true, etched from musket lead, their corners worn soft, their faces dark with thumb grease, and maybe a bit of dried blood. No one knows who carved them. One rumor claims they came from Blackbeard's own pistol balls. Another insists they were made from the melted buttons of a murdered naval officer. They're ugly, misshapen. Each has 5 sides marked with crude pips, and one side blank, ominous, like a held breath, and yet they're revered. Tonight, they're not being used to settle a fight. They're being prepared. A quiet ritual takes place, overseen by the ship's unofficial lucky hand, a wiry man called Bones who speaks 5 languages and believes in none of them. Bones treats the dice with reverence. First, he rubs them with oil, fish, not olive. Then he dips them briefly in seawater from a cup blessed earlier by a passing monk, who may have been drunk but wore the right kind of robe. Finally, he breathes on them 3 times while muttering what sounds like a spell but might just be the lyrics to an old tavern tune about goats. You watch, enraptured. Because for all its chaos, the pirate world is deeply superstitious, and dice, more than swords or gold or even grog, are believed to carry luck, which is to say, power. Superstition clings to these objects like barnacles to the hull. You've seen dice stored in velvet pouches, tiny wooden coffins, even glass bottles sealed with wax. Some pirates refuse to touch them unless wearing their fortune shirt, usually stained, torn, and unwashed, for 7 consecutive ports. You once heard of a man who tattooed his dice roll results onto his forearm. He claimed the ink brought better outcomes. He lost the next 6 throws and blamed the tattooist. There's a logic to it, in a twisted way. When your whole life is governed by wind, disease, betrayal, and cannonballs, you crave some kind of control, even if it's just the illusion of it. The dice provide that, and they're not all alike. Some are carved from bone, shark, whale, or, as rumor has it, human. One pair aboard the Lady's Scorn was rumored to have been carved from a bishop's femur and never rolled higher than a 4. Another, made of coral, shattered during a heated dispute, which everyone took as a sign from Poseidon to stop arguing about shirts. Dice were sometimes personalized. One face might bear a toothy grin, another a skull. The blank side? That was the death mark. If both dice landed blank, it meant the worst possible outcome. Punishment chosen by the ship's cat. The cat, as it turns out, had a talent for leading offenders to the barrel of spoiled lard. Historians still argue whether pirate superstition served a greater purpose or was just a coping mechanism. Some say it helped manage group psychology, providing a shared belief system in an otherwise leaderless environment. Others argue it was simply an outgrowth of boredom, salted with rum and repetition. But Bones swears by it. He once claimed the dice saved the ship. It was a week into a long, waterless stretch when mutiny whispers stirred below deck. Accusations flew. Hoarding, cheating, favoritism. Instead of blades, the captain passed out dice. "Roll to reveal the liar," he said. They all did. One man rolled 2 blanks. He was put ashore the next morning, alone but with a jug of water and a compass. The mood lifted immediately. Whether he was the thief didn't matter. The dice had spoken. You don't know if that story's true, but you do know that nobody on this ship rolls without wiping the dice on their sleeve first, or knocking them gently 3 times before tossing, or spitting over their left shoulder. And they all look away while they roll. Not because they're afraid, because they respect the outcome. That's what musket dice represent now. Not just randomness, but ritual. Not just chance, but choice, handed over to something beyond yourself, something ancient, maybe even sacred. You hear a whisper from Bones as he places the clean dice back into their pouch. "Tomorrow," he says, "they'll decide who gets the last bottle." He smiles. "You better hope you roll high." Section 10. It's midday, and the sun's turned cruel again, burning straight through the tar-soaked awnings, painting the deck boards into a checkerboard of blistering hot and blistering hotter. The ship bobs lazily, not from storm or steering, but from a collective case of nobody's doing anything until the heat stops trying to murder us. That's when the shout comes from below. "Cheater!" You peek over the stairwell, cautiously. It's not a fight, yet, but it's warming up faster than a pot of turtle stew. 2 pirates, Mickle and Hans, stand over a makeshift table. The dice are scattered, the mood is bad, and someone's holding a small parrot that seems both alarmed and interested. Apparently, they'd been rolling to decide who got the better hammock in the shade. Mickle rolled 2 6s. Hans claims he saw Mickle flip 1 mid-bounce with his pinky. Now it's a whole thing. The captain appears within seconds, not because of the cheating. It happens, but because of the accusation. On a pirate ship, cheating at dice is a mortal sin. Not because of the rules, but because of the trust. The dice only work if everyone believes in the ritual. So what happens when that belief cracks? You watch as the crew forms a circle. The dice are retrieved. The accused stands in the middle, arms folded, the picture of performative innocence. The accuser spits and demands a reroll under supervision. The parrot, unhelpfully, squawks, "Cheat!" and gets a laugh from someone in the back. The captain, face like sun-bleached stone, calls for the judgment. Now, here's where pirate justice gets inventive. There's no plank walking, no instant stabbing. Instead, The accused is given one chance. Roll the dice again. Twice. If he beats his previous high score without touching the dice mid-air, he's cleared. If not, well, let's just say a jar of hot tar and some goose feathers are being readied nearby. Mikkel steps forward. He picks up the dice. Gingerly, he doesn't kiss them. He doesn't whisper. The crowd holds its breath. You even see the cook put down his cleaver. He rolls. First toss, 4 and 5. Second toss, 2 and 3. Not even close. There's silence. The parrot squawks again. Loud. The sign is too wide to fit comfortably through doorways. The sign is too wide to fit comfortably through doorways. It stays on for 3 days. This might seem silly, but there's deep psychology at work. On pirate ships, reputation is everything. You have no bank account, no resume, no second chances. What you do, everyone sees. So shame, not violence, often becomes the currency of correction. And that's where the dice really shine. Because they're neutral. Everyone agreed to the terms. Everyone saw the outcome. You can't argue with the dice, only the man holding them. Historians still argue whether cheating was as big a deal as some stories suggest. After all, these are pirates, not monks. But there are enough scattered records to suggest that cheaters, when caught, were punished in elaborate and humiliating ways. One sailor's memoir mentions a man made to wear a lobster shell as a helmet for a week after being caught marking his dice with soot. Another speaks of a cheat being forced to host a banquet using nothing but ship's biscuit and seawater. The point wasn't pain, it was memory. You cheat and you become that guy. The one who got tarred, the one who wore the shell, the one who made everyone laugh at him. And worse, you don't get to roll anymore. Because once the dice lose their power, everything falls apart. You can hear it in the murmurs that follow the incident. Quiet reminders spoken to newcomers, nods passed from hand to hand like secret oaths. Never roll with your back to the wind. Always let the dice rest a second before picking them up. And most importantly, don't ever think you're smarter than the dice. Later that night, you pass by Mikkel's hammock, his new one, furthest from the shade, directly beneath the creakiest beam on the ship. His signboard has been propped beside him like a tombstone. He grunts as you pass. You say nothing. Because deep down, everyone knows there's no coming back from breaking the one rule that keeps the chaos at bay. Section 11. You're back at sea again. The wind brisk and clean, the stars like lanterns scattered across black silk. The ship glides smooth tonight, sails puffed and ropes taut. Almost peaceful, if not for the whispers. A rebellion is brewing. You don't see it at first. You hear it. Low voices in the galley, a mist clink of steel at midnight, a change in how the men watch the captain. It's not loud. That's the trick. True mutiny starts like a fever, subtle, slow, and contagious. The captain, a seasoned man who once fought off 3 Dutchmen with a broken oar and a bad attitude, isn't blind. He sees the tension, smells it. So he doesn't wait. He calls a meeting. That's what they call it anyway. In truth, it's a kind of ritual, a gathering at dusk where grievances are named and answers are found, not in fists or speeches, but in the dice. He brings them out himself. Not the usual musket dice, but a special pair, carved from black volcanic rock, cold even in the sun. No pips, just deep grooves and strange markings said to resemble Polynesian tide maps. No one really understands them, but everyone respects them. These, the captain says, are mutiny dice. The rule is simple. If enough crew feel the captain no longer serves them, they may challenge. If they fail to challenge, not with swords, not yet, with a roll. Each side, captain and challenger, selects a champion. The chosen men roll best of 3. If the challenger wins, the captain steps down. If not, well, the matter is considered settled until the next wave of discontent. Tonight, the challenger is called Harrow. He's tall, fast, and smart in a way that makes people nervous. He was voted bosun 2 months ago and now walks the ship like he already owns it. This is the way it should be. I'll be watching the ship, the boatswain. He steps forward, gives a slight bow. The captain selects Bones. You've seen Bones roll before. He's quiet, methodical, and slightly cursed. The dice are laid on a blanket. The crew forms a wide ring. No one speaks. Not even the parrot, who seems to understand this is serious business. First roll. Harrow throws high, an 8, somehow, on dice with no numbers. Bones rolls a 6. Second roll. Bones lands a 9. Harrow, only a 5. All tied up. Final roll. Harrow lifts the dice, turns them once in his palm, and throws. The stones clatter. One lands groove up. The other rolls and then, without reason, flips in mid-air, landing on its side, a narrow ridge that should be impossible. A collective gasp. Bones rolls without flair, just a drop. They settle slow and sure. He wins. Harrow doesn't flinch. He bows again, steps back, and says nothing. That's the rule. That's the dice. The captain nods, perhaps grateful. He doesn't gloat, he doesn't scold. Instead, he calls for grog. Because he knows what just happened wasn't a power struggle. It was a pressure valve. The crew had doubts. They were aired. The dice decided. And everyone watched. Historians still puzzle over accounts like these. Ritualized decision-making wrapped in drama and superstition. Some see it as early democracy. Others call it magical thinking with props. But most agree it worked. Why? Because it wasn't just about the outcome. It was about the process. Everyone saw the rules applied. Everyone saw chance take control. And in that shared moment, order returned. There's something deeply human about that. We crave justice, yes, but what we truly crave is consensus. A sense that, win or lose, we were part of the story. You think about this as you watch Bones carefully gather the dice, wrap them in cloth, and hand them to the captain. They won't be used again soon. But they're there. Waiting. Just in case. And maybe that's all a pirate crew needs. Not absolute truth or perfect leaders, but a system, however bizarre, that gives structure to chaos. One roll at a time. Section 12. The deck is sticky with molasses. Not metaphorically. Someone knocked over a cask during last night's raid, and now every barefoot step is a faint schlurk. The crew doesn't mind. They're still drunk on victory, grinning over barrels of sugar, bolts of cloth, and a surprising amount of ginger root. But not everyone is pleased. The Royal Navy is on your tail, or at least, that's the rumor passed in a hushed loop. From mast to galley, a British sloop, fast and clean, was seen 2 days ago shadowing a merchant route your ship just happened to raid. And that's got everyone on edge. You'd think pirates wouldn't care. Defiance is half the brand. But here's the thing. Getting caught by the Navy isn't like losing a tavern brawl. It's gallows, no trial, with a bonus sermon, and maybe a posthumous pamphlet titled, Why Crime Doesn't Pay. So the crew holds a council, and for once there's a visitor, a Navy deserter captured during the last boarding. His name's Emery, and he's been kept locked in a hold, fed biscuit crumbs and suspicious soup. Now he's seated in the middle of the circle like a goat at a wedding. The question, what would the Navy do if they caught this ship? Hang them all? Or offer deals? You'd think a man in his position would say anything to save his hide. But Emery is calm. Too calm. Depends on the captain, he says. Some of them negotiate. Most don't. Proof? Someone asks. He shrugs. I've seen it. Once. No one believes him. So they turn to the only neutral party aboard. The dice. This isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about risk. A classic pirate predicament. Stay the course and risk Navy pursuit? or take the long way around the island chain and lose a week of plunder time. They roll. Captain and quartermaster each choose a side, cut through the reef channel or loop around the archipelago. High roll decides. But there's a twist. This time, Emery rolls on behalf of the Navy's supposed plan. A strange proxy, yes, but the crew finds it poetic. If the Navy's ghost haunts them, let the ghost roll the bones. The dice are brought out, not the black volcanic ones, nor the cursed pewter pair, but the middling set. Brass-cornered, whalebone core, slightly off-wented from years of use. They roll truer than the rest, and more often than not, they roll for peace. Emery kneels, rolls once, 5, and 3. The quartermaster steps up, rolls 6 and 1. The captain pauses, sighs, then rolls 4 and 4. It's a tie. In pirate lore, ties are rare, and when they happen, they mean something. Fate isn't ready to decide, so the dice are rolled again. This time, only one die per player. The rest is left to wind and whim. Emery rolls 5, the quartermaster 3, the captain 6. The crew cheers, not just because it's a high number, but because someone finally made a decision that feels right. They'll loop around the long way, safer, slower, but smarter. Later, Emery is given a real meal, a knife, not to fight, but to peel ginger, and a hammock. He's not one of them, but for now, he's useful. And in pirate society, usefulness is everything. This entire episode, to an outsider, would seem bizarre. Why let a former enemy roll your fate? Why use dice when you've got eyes and charts and instincts? But that's just it. Pirates knew that instinct could lie, that egos flare, and arguments spiral, and sometimes the best way to choose a path is to hand it over to something else, something not human. Historians still argue about this peculiar reliance on inanimate objects. Was it cowardice masked as ritual? Was it superstition clinging to a logicless life? Or was it, dare they admit, functional psychology? The British Navy mocked pirate dice in official memos. One Commodore wrote that pirates submit to childish games, casting their futures like common gamblers. Ironically, within a year, that same Commodore was found negotiating with a mutinous crew using, yes, a set of ivory dice. Sometimes the system spreads. You return to your bunk, still a little sticky-footed, and think about the way power flows on this ship. Not from rank, not from fear, but from the belief that a roll of dice, watched by all, means something binding. Even the sea seems to approve tonight. The breeze is steady, the stars blink their soft approval, and the molasses, still sticky, but no one's complaining. So, when readers and fans stop the book and turn to it, what does it mean? Means, not, 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 mean, it means something. Section 13. It's Tortuga. The real one. Smellier than legends admit, louder than maps suggest, and more dangerous than most battlefields. If only because here, the rum flows faster than the blood, and both are equally likely to end up on your boots. The ship's docked for repairs. Minor hull damage from scraping too close to a reef, but that's just the excuse. Everyone's eager for a few days on land. Warm bread, soft beds, bad decisions. You tag along to the Powdered Swan, a tavern whose ceiling is made of mismatched sails and whose rules are written in 6 languages, none of which include the word no. And that's where the dice make their most dramatic appearance yet. It starts, like all great pirate stories, with music. Someone's playing a violin. But not just any violin. It's a sleek, lacquered beauty, dark as coffee, and strung with strings finer than anything sold in these parts. The kind of instrument that doesn't just play songs, but commands them. Each note sings above the din like a siren through fog. Naturally, someone wants it. More specifically, two someones. A French privateer named Louvier, who claims it belonged to his grandfather, and an English gunner named Treadwell, who says he won it fair in a card game 6 ports ago. They argue, loudly. Drinks are spilled. Chairs are eyed menacingly. A fight seems inevitable. Until someone, not even a crew member, just a bystander with a keen sense for drama, calls out, "Musket dice!" The tavern pauses, then roars. Suddenly, the dice are fetched from behind the bar. Yes, this tavern keeps its own set. They're carved from whale tooth, yellowed with age, with pips painted in wine residue and charcoal. One side is chipped. As long as I live, no one will say no. I have been the worst hunter in the pack, but no one has ever called me a mugger. This time, the squab weighs less. No one says no. When the dice is pulled up, the table is cleared. Now, one side is chipped. Diet, down. The rope, 9, bads 10 foot. When the dice is pulled up, the table is cleared out and everyone is set. One side is chipped. Nobody minds. Louvier and Treadwell kneel at a cleared table. A pile of bets begins to gather. Not just coins, but buttons, rings, promises, and one extremely reluctant chicken. Best of 3. First roll, Treadwell throws a 5. Louvier throws a 5. Tie. Second roll, Treadwell rolls a 6. Louvier a 2. Gasps. One more and it's over. Final roll. Louvier, calm, kisses the die and lets it roll. Someone shouted something, but it's too late now. Someone is going to deal with the debt. Best of 3. Final roll 6. Treadwell rolls and lands on the chip side. It wobbles. The tavern holds its breath. Then settles on 1. Louvier has won. Treadwell stares at the violin like it's just divorced him. Then, remarkably, he nods, stands, and buys Louvier a drink. No fists, no broken chairs, no duel at dawn, just a resolution. And the crowd, they celebrate, because they saw fairness unfold. They saw men bow to fate, and they saw, maybe for the first time that week, peace made without blood. But the story doesn't end there. The next morning, Louvier is gone. So is the violin, and the tavern's musket dice. No one saw him leave. No one hears from him again. But the tale becomes instant legend. The dice roll heard round Tortuga, as it's whispered in corners for years to come. Historians still argue over whether this event actually happened, or if it's just a pirate retelling of King Solomon and the baby. There's no record of Louvier or Treadwell outside oral history, but the tavern's ledgers from 1721 do show an unexplained loss. 1 set of dice, whale tooth, presumed stolen. But that's Tortuga for you. In a town built on vice, even justice is portable. And the dice? They became myth. Some say Louvier still plays his violin in far-off ports, offering songs for shelter and rolling dice whenever someone tries to challenge him. Weather said, why should he take care of someone else when he can challenge himself and be what he wants without challenging someone? Others say the violin was cursed, that anyone who won it lost something dear in return. A ship, a limb, a piece of pride. But the most popular version? That Louvier melted the dice down and cast them into bullets, fated rounds that would always strike true because they were forged from truth. You can choose which version you believe, but here's what you know for sure. In a world where trust is rare, where law is flexible, and where reputations rot faster than meat, there's something powerful about a pair of dice that everyone agrees to obey. even here, even in Tortuga. As she sat watching the world go by, something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body.